She rehearsed for weeks. Built an app that could change lives. Delivered a flawless presentation in front of an entire auditorium. And yet, her father didn't even clap. But just when she thought his silence meant failure, the mayor stood up and made an announcement that shocked everyone. What happened next, no one saw coming. Stick around until the very end, because the final moment between her and her father will hit harder than any standing ovation. Tap like and subscribe now, this one will stay with you. I had spent weeks preparing for that presentation. Every slide, every word, every pause was rehearsed until I could say it in my sleep. I stayed up late most nights, tweaking the design, fine-tuning the pitch, watching videos of startup founders to mimic their confidence. I wasn't just presenting a project. I was trying to prove I belonged. That I had something worth saying. That maybe, just maybe, my dad would finally see me. We lived in a quiet town just outside Atlanta. My high school was known more for football than science fairs, but this event was different. It was the first time the mayor's office partnered with local schools to sponsor innovation grants. And my project, an app that helped local businesses reduce waste and donate excess food, had made it to the final round. I was one of 5 finalists. I was the only girl. That morning, I came downstairs in the outfit I'd picked carefully, clean white blouse, dark jeans, and the same boots I wore every time I needed to feel strong. Dad was at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. He looked up briefly, nodded, and said, "Ready?" That was it. No smile, no "you'll do great." Just ready? In the car, I tried to break the silence. "I think the judges will like the community impact part." He nodded again. "That's good," he said. I waited for more. Nothing came. He turned on the radio. When we got to the auditorium, he parked the truck and handed me my laptop bag. "Good luck," he said, without making eye contact. I got out and stood there for a second, holding the bag, my stomach tight with nerves. I watched him drive off to park, probably planning to sit in the back like he always did. If he came in at all. Inside, everything was buzzing. Students pacing, teachers pinning final banners, a table of local officials being briefed. I found my spot and opened my laptop, forcing myself to focus. No time for emotions. Just the pitch. But as I looked around at the other finalists, some with moms adjusting their collars, dads snapping photos, I felt the space beside me like a weight. I wanted to not care. I wanted to believe I didn't need him to clap or say he was proud. But I did. I really, really did. And still, I knew, no matter what happened on that stage, I would give them something they wouldn't forget. They called us to line up behind the stage. I could hear the chatter of the audience, teachers, students, a few local business people, and some parents. The mayor was already seated near the front. Someone whispered that there was a reporter from the local paper. My hands were shaking, so I held them behind my back. Before me was Devin, a senior who'd built a solar-powered water purifier. Behind me was Rachel, whose dad was literally adjusting her microphone for her. He gave her a thumbs up and said, "You got this, sweetheart." She smiled and squeezed his hand. I looked away. That used to be hard to see. Now, it just made me feel hollow. Like I was standing in the middle of something I couldn't name. I wasn't angry. I didn't even know if I was sad. Just blank. Like a hallway with all the doors closed. A teacher gestured to me, it was almost my turn. I took a deep breath and looked out into the auditorium. Rows of chairs. A few cameras. And there, near the back, was my dad. Alone. Arms crossed. Not smiling. Not waving. Just there. It almost surprised me that he came inside. But maybe that was just obligation. He was always about doing what was responsible. Not what made you feel seen. The host called my name. I walked on stage. The lights were bright and warm. I could hear my own breath in the mic. I launched into my pitch, my voice slightly trembling but steadying after the first slide. I spoke about food waste in our city. About how my app connected grocery stores and restaurants with shelters in real time, matching excess food to where it was needed most. I talked about how we tested the model with 3 businesses already, and showed the results, clear, measurable impact. And then, silence. Then applause. It was real. Loud. Not polite, but excited. I saw the mayor whispering something to his assistant. The principal nodded at me, smiling. Teachers clapped. A few people even stood. But I looked straight to the back. My dad sat there. Arms still crossed. No clapping. No smile. No nod. Just still. I stepped off stage. My chest felt full and empty at the same time. People congratulated me as I passed, but I barely heard them. I walked out the side door and sat on the cold concrete steps behind the building. That's when I heard the door open behind me. I didn't turn around when I heard the door open. I just sat there, elbows on my knees, eyes fixed on a crack in the pavement. For a second, I hoped it was my dad. That maybe he'd followed me out to say something, anything. But it was just Devin, holding 2 water bottles. "Hey," he said, handing me one. "You crushed it up there." I forced a smile and took the bottle. "Thanks." He sat next to me. "You okay?" I nodded, but he must have seen through it. "My dad used to be like that too," he said. "He came to my first science fair and just stood in the corner. Didn't say a word the whole ride home. I thought I'd failed somehow. I didn't say anything. I wasn't used to people talking about this kind of thing." Devin leaned back against the wall. "Then one day, I found this article he cut out from the paper about my project. Said he carried it in his wallet. Never told me. Just kept it." I looked at him, surprised. "Really?" "Yeah. Some people just don't know how to show things out loud." I thought about that for a moment. Maybe that was true. Maybe my dad just didn't know how. But even knowing that didn't stop it from hurting. The door opened again. This time, it was a staff member. "Hey, they're calling everyone back inside for the awards." We stood up and walked around the building. The hallway buzzed with nervous energy. Rachel was fixing her hair in a mirror. A kid from the middle school division looked like he was going to be sick. I checked my reflection briefly. My face was flushed, but calm. Back in the auditorium, the lights were softer now. The host walked to the mic and welcomed everyone back. One by one, they handed out certificates and smaller awards. Honorable mentions. Best teamwork. Community choice. Then the host paused, holding a gold envelope. "And now," she said, "the grant for innovation and community impact, funded directly by the mayor's office, goes to..." She opened it slowly. I didn't even feel my heart racing. Everything felt slow. To Lila Harper, for her work connecting local businesses to shelters with real-time food donation technology. There was applause. Loud again. I stood, a little stunned, and walked to the stage. The mayor himself stood and shook my hand. "You're exactly the kind of person we need building the future," he said. Then louder, so the whole room could hear, "We're not just recognizing her. We're funding her. The city will provide the startup capital to get her platform off the ground." Gasps. Cheers. And from the back. I looked again. My dad was standing. For a second, I didn't believe it. My dad, standing. Not clapping. Not smiling. Just standing. Like the news had physically lifted him out of his seat. Our eyes met across the auditorium. He didn't look proud. He looked confused. Like he wasn't sure what just happened. I accepted the certificate and the envelope from the mayor, trying not to let my hands shake. Everyone was watching. Cameras clicked. A teacher offered to take my picture. I smiled for it, but my mind was still at the back of the room. When I stepped down, people kept congratulating me. Someone from the city council gave me a card and said, "Call us when you're ready to talk next steps." Rachel gave me a hug. Devin gave me a high five. It all felt like it was happening to someone else. Then I saw him. My dad was walking down the aisle toward me. Slow, almost hesitant. I stood frozen, still holding the folder with the city seal on it. "Lila," he said. That was it. Just my name. I waited. I wanted him to say more. That he was proud. That he was surprised. That he was sorry. Anything. Instead, he just nodded once and said, "You ready to go?" I blinked. "Yeah," I said, my voice small. He turned and walked toward the exit. I followed. The drive home was quiet again. I looked out the window most of the way. The folder rested in my lap. Every few seconds I opened it just to make sure it was real. $15,000 in seed funding. A mentor assigned from the city's business development team. A 2-month summer accelerator program downtown. I finally spoke. "You know, that's enough to launch a real version of the app." He nodded. "That's good." I waited for him to say more. He didn't. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and sat there for a second before getting out. I stayed in the car. Watched him walk up the steps and unlock the door. He didn't look back. Later that night, I found myself in the garage. That's where I used to work on the app, at the little fold-out table by the toolshed. I opened my laptop, but I didn't touch the keyboard. All I could think about was how much I had wanted him to say something in that moment. Anything. I didn't need balloons or a big hug. Just words. A look. Something to tell me he felt it. Instead, I had applause from strangers. A check from the mayor. A folder that changed everything. And a father who still didn't know how to clap. The next morning, I woke up early without an alarm. My brain was buzzing, but my body felt heavy. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, still unsure if everything had really happened. The applause. The funding. The mayor's words. It was all real. But somehow, it felt incomplete. I went downstairs and found Dad already at the kitchen table. He was dressed for work, coffee in hand, scrolling his phone like every other day. I sat across from him. He didn't say anything. I reached into my backpack and placed the folder on the table between us. "I got it," I said, even though he already knew. 15,000. And they're assigning me a mentor. He looked at the folder. Then looked at me. "That's a big responsibility." That was all. I gave a small nod. "Yeah. I know." I thought maybe he'd ask something. What I was planning to do next. How I felt. If I needed help. But he just stood up, rinsed his cup in the sink, and grabbed his keys. "Let me know if you need a ride later," he said, and walked out. I sat there for a while, staring at the folder. My heart ached in that quiet way only disappointment can create. I didn't expect fireworks. I just wanted something. By mid-afternoon, I got a call from the program coordinator at City Hall. Her name was Elise. She sounded excited to work with me and said my assigned mentor would reach out that week. She also invited me to a small reception being held for all the finalists. "The mayor will be there again," she said. "He specifically asked to speak with you." When I told Dad about it later that night, he just said, "That's nice," and went back to fixing something in the shed. I knew he was proud. Deep down, I had to believe that. But I didn't want to be guessing anymore. I didn't want silence to be our language. 2 days later, something strange happened. It was just after dinner. I was cleaning up the dishes when Dad walked in from the garage holding a small box. He placed it on the kitchen counter and said, "Thought you might need this." I opened it. It was an old toolkit, screwdrivers, pliers, some electrical tape. Most of it looked barely used. "From when I tried to build that speaker in high school," he said. "Didn't work, but the tools held up." I smiled a little. Thanks. He gave a half shrug. You're building something now. Figured it should start with the right tools. That moment wasn't loud. It wasn't applause. But it was something. A gesture. A start. And then came the real surprise. The next afternoon, I was in the living room when the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there, standing in a clean button-up and polished shoes, was the mayor. He smiled. Hope I'm not interrupting. I was in the neighborhood and wanted to speak with your father. My heart stopped. With my dad? He nodded. Yes. I'd like to invite both of you to a city business luncheon next week. I want your father to see the role he played in raising someone this determined. I didn't know what to say. But before I could answer, Dad appeared behind me. Mayor, he said with a nod. And the mayor smiled. Mr. Harper, it's time we all start clapping. The mayor's visit shook something loose in the air between us. Not much was said that evening, but the silence felt different. Lighter. Like a window had been cracked open after a long, breathless pause. The business luncheon was set for the following Wednesday at the Civic Center. I didn't know what to expect. I'd never been to a luncheon before, let alone one where people in suits talked about venture capital and innovation hubs. I wasn't even sure what to wear. But when I came downstairs that morning in my navy dress and flats, Dad was already dressed. Button-down shirt, pressed slacks, polished shoes. He looked like someone going to a wedding. I almost laughed. But what caught me was the way he looked at me when I stepped into the room. Not just at me. Into me. Like he was finally seeing the version of me that had been growing quietly all these years. You look ready, he said. I blinked. You too. He drove us downtown in silence again, but it didn't feel cold this time. Just focused. I was nervous. My palms were sweaty the whole ride. He noticed at a red light and reached over to grab a napkin from the glove box. Handed it to me without a word. Inside the Civic Center, it was all white tablecloths and quiet jazz music playing through hidden speakers. People smiled politely. There was a banner that said, "Celebrating local innovation, building the future together." We found our table. The name cards were printed neatly. Lila Harper. Mr. Richard Harper. He looked at his and gave a small chuckle. Haven't been called Mr. Harper since your parent-teacher nights in 5th grade. We sat. The mayor gave a short speech. A few city officials introduced themselves. Someone from a regional incubator asked if I'd be interested in pitching the app to angel investors in the fall. I nodded politely, heart pounding. Then, halfway through lunch, the mayor stood again and said, "Today we're not just here to honor innovation, but to recognize the quiet force behind it, the support systems that allow it to grow. Parents. Mentors. Teachers." He turned toward our table. And today, I want to thank Mr. Richard Harper for showing up. For raising someone who didn't just have a good idea, but the persistence to see it through. Everyone clapped. I looked at Dad. And for the first time, he didn't look confused. Or uncomfortable. Or unsure of what to say. He looked proud. Later, in the parking lot, we didn't rush to the car. We stood there a moment, just the two of us, under the shade of a big tree near the lot entrance. "I didn't know how to help you," he said quietly. "I saw you working so hard, but I thought, if I got too close, I'd mess it up." "You never had to do it for me," I said. "Just with me." He nodded, slow. "I know that now." And in that small corner of a big city, under the branches of a tree we'd probably never see again, something shifted between us. Not everything had to be said out loud. But this time, it was. After that luncheon, things didn't change overnight. My dad didn't suddenly become talkative, and we didn't start hugging each other every morning. But something had softened. There was less silence and more presence. He started asking little things, like when the first app prototype would be ready, or how many volunteers I needed to onboard. They were simple questions, but they felt like doors slowly opening. One afternoon, a week later, I came home from a meeting with Elise and found him in the garage. But not just standing around, he had cleared out an entire corner. My fold-out table had been replaced with a sturdy wooden workbench. The old lamp he used when fixing fishing reels was set up, and my tools were neatly organized in bins labeled hardware, cables, and spares. I stared at it. "Did you do all this?" He didn't look up right away. "Figured you needed a real place to build." It wasn't just a gesture. It was investment. In me. In my dream. That weekend, we started working together on the first physical donation bin prototype. It was supposed to be a simple box with temperature sensors, but I was struggling to stabilize the wiring. He walked over, took one look, and said, "You're grounding it wrong. Watch." Then he showed me a trick with insulation tape and steady pressure that actually worked. I blinked. "How do you know this stuff?" He shrugged. "Wired half the machines at the plant before they switched to digital. Guess some of it stuck." For the first time, I realized how much he knew, how much he'd kept to himself all these years. As the project grew, so did our routine. He'd get up early and brew 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. He started using words like API and beta testing, even though I knew he didn't fully understand them. When I held my first virtual meeting with the food shelter director, he was the one who double-checked the Wi-Fi and closed the garage door so I wouldn't be distracted. And then, one afternoon, something small happened that felt huge. I was talking to Elise on speakerphone. She was listing possible local investors who might want to partner with the app once the pilot finished. My dad was across the room, wiping down tools, acting like he wasn't listening. But as soon as the call ended, he said, "You should talk to Ed Ramsey." I frowned. "Who's that?" "Runs a grocery distribution center 2 towns over. He always hated throwing food out. Bet he'd love this." He gave me Ed's number from memory. The next day, I called Ed. He not only agreed to meet, he offered to be the first major donor partner. When I told my dad, he just gave a small smile and said, "Sometimes you just have to ask the right people." It was the first time I saw him as more than just a quiet father. He was a quiet builder, too. Of machines. Of spaces. Of people. Including me. It was a quiet Saturday evening when I finally said it out loud. We were in the garage again, organizing the second donation bin prototype. The first one had already been delivered to a local bakery that agreed to participate in the pilot program. This second one was going to a small grocery store near the edge of town. Dad was helping me tighten the latches on the side panels. He wasn't saying much, just humming a tune I didn't recognize. I watched his hands move, steady, practiced, and I realized how many hours we'd now spent together without needing to explain anything. "I used to think you didn't care," I said. He looked up, but didn't respond right away. "I thought that if you didn't clap, or smile, or say you were proud, it meant I wasn't enough," I continued. My voice didn't shake. I wasn't crying. I just needed to say it. I know that sounds dumb, but it stayed with me. For a long time. He set down the drill and sat on the edge of the workbench. He exhaled slowly, like the words he'd been holding were finally making their way out. "I always cared," he said. "I just didn't know how to say it in the right way." I stayed quiet. "I grew up in a house where nobody clapped," he added. "Even when I won something at school, my dad just nodded and went back to his paper. I thought, maybe you didn't need it either. That maybe it'd make you stronger if you figured it out alone." I sat down beside him. The room felt warmer somehow. "I didn't need you to fix anything for me," I said. "I just wanted you to be part of it." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." We sat in silence for a few minutes. Not the heavy kind that used to stretch between us, but the soft kind. The kind that comes after honesty. Then, almost shyly, he said, "You know, I read about this community business grant upstate. They're helping startups with matching funds if they serve low-income areas. You might qualify." I smiled. Where'd you read that? He hesitated. I signed up for one of those newsletters. Thought I should learn a few things. I laughed, really laughed, and he did too. It was the first time in years that our laughter felt natural. Shared. Earned. Later that night, I found a note taped to the fridge. Proud of you. Even if I forget to say it out loud. Dad. It was written in blue ink, all capital letters, just like he signed his name on checks. I kept that note in my wallet from that day on. Because sometimes, the loudest things aren't shouted from a stage. They're scribbled quietly and left on the fridge. And sometimes, that's enough. I never thought I'd see my dad in a team meeting, let alone one with laptops and whiteboards and half-eaten bagels on the table. But there he was, leaning back in a folding chair in our tiny makeshift office space, sipping coffee and listening like he belonged there. And in a way, he did. We were a small team, just me, my friend Marcy from school who was great with spreadsheets, a retired logistics guy named Paul who'd volunteered to help us map routes, and now, my dad. He wasn't officially on payroll. He didn't want a title. But he showed up every day after work and on weekends, always with something useful in his pocket, a socket wrench, a printout of a food bank schedule, a new lead. You know, Marcy said one day after he helped troubleshoot a bin's faulty sensor, your dad could be a project manager. I smiled. Don't let him hear you say that. He'll start charging us. But truthfully, he wasn't doing it for the title or the thanks. He did it because something had shifted in him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was love. Maybe it was just, finally seeing that showing up mattered more than showing off. And I was changing too. I found myself relying on him, not just for his hands-on skills, but for the calm he brought into the chaos. When I had back-to-back calls and things started falling through the cracks, he was the one who said, "Go take a walk. I'll finish loading the van." One afternoon, after we finished a delivery run to a shelter that had just expanded its food program, I caught him standing outside the building. Just watching. Quiet. Still. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded, then looked at me. "It's a good thing you're doing." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. He shook his head. "That's not true. You would've. You always had it in you. I just wish I'd seen it sooner." I stepped closer. "You see it now." He gave a slow nod. "Yeah. I do." That night, while updating the app's feedback section, I saw a message from the shelter we'd just visited. It was a photo of a group of kids holding up handwritten thank you signs. In the background, I noticed something familiar, my dad, unloading crates from the truck, wearing his faded baseball cap and a quiet smile. I saved that photo. Not because I needed proof, but because it reminded me that sometimes the people who love us just need time to learn the language of showing up. And when they do, you realize they were always trying, in their own silent, stumbling way. By the time we delivered the fourth donation bin, people had started calling the app by name. Not just Lila's project, but the name I'd chosen for it, Full Circle. The shelters were talking to each other. Stores that never participated in food recovery were now reaching out. The pilot wasn't just working, it was living. And my dad was still there. Every step. One morning, I woke up to find a folded newspaper on the kitchen table. Circled in blue pen was an article, "Small Startup Helps City Feed Its Own." A photo showed one of our bins in front of a grocery store, and right below it, me. Smiling. Arms crossed. Confident. I looked over at my dad, already sipping coffee at the counter. "You circled it?" He didn't look up. "Thought you might have missed it." "I get alerts on my phone," I said. He shrugged. "Still worth cutting out." Later that day, I invited him to sit in on a strategy session with the mayor's assistant. I figured he'd decline. Instead, he said, "What time?" We arrived early, as always. The assistant, Laura, was younger than I expected, sharp and full of ideas. She greeted me enthusiastically, then turned to my dad and said, "And you must be Mr. Harper. Lila mentioned how much you've helped with implementation." He smiled, genuinely. Just keeping things moving. As the meeting went on, I noticed something I hadn't before. My dad wasn't just participating. He was adding value. Asking smart questions. Offering insights. At one point, Laura said, "We need more thinkers like you involved." Afterward, walking back to the car, I said, "You were great in there." He shrugged. "Was just talking." "No," I said. "You were helping. In a way no one else could." He didn't respond, but I caught the edge of a smile tugging at his mouth. That evening, he surprised me again. He brought a tray of coffees to the garage, one for me, one for Marcy, and one for Paul, who had just arrived for a late-night logistics session. "I figured I'd be the office coffee guy tonight," he said, placing them down like it was the most natural thing in the world. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just my dream anymore. It was ours. Not because he took it over, or because I needed him to carry me. But because he chose to walk beside me. Quietly. Daily. Purposefully. I thought back to the girl who stood on that auditorium stage, looking for someone to clap. Now, I didn't need applause. I had presence. And sometimes, that's louder than a room full of cheers. The launch event for Full Circle was scheduled for the first Saturday in May. It was set to take place at a renovated community center in the heart of the city, the same one where I'd once stood quietly beside my science fair display board, hoping someone would stop and listen. Now the room was buzzing before we even arrived. Marcy and Paul were already there, adjusting signs and setting up the demo bins. A food truck we'd partnered with was handing out donated baked goods repackaged for free distribution. The mayor's office had sent out a press release. There were folding chairs, banners, balloons, the whole thing felt unreal. I hadn't slept much the night before. I kept going over my speech in my head. Not because I wanted it to be perfect, but because I needed to say the right things. To thank the right people. When I walked into the center that morning, I scanned the room and found him. Dad. Front row. He wasn't just sitting there. He was already talking to someone from a local shelter, showing them how the temperature tracking app worked. He was wearing his good shirt, the one he only used for important things. When our eyes met, he gave me a nod. No words. Just that nod. I nodded back. The program began. The mayor gave a speech about civic innovation and youth leadership. Elise talked about how our project had surpassed every benchmark. Then it was my turn. I stepped onto the small stage and looked out at the crowd. I could feel the microphone shaking slightly in my hand, but my voice was steady. I talked about hunger. Waste. Community. I shared the numbers, the impact, the partnerships we'd built. But more than that, I talked about people. About how no one builds something meaningful alone. I paused, then looked at my dad. When I started this journey, I thought I had to prove myself to be seen, I said. But I've learned something bigger, that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it fixes your wiring. Sometimes it brings you coffee when you're too tired to stand. The room was silent. Listening. I wouldn't be here without the support of someone who didn't always have the words, but always showed up. I heard someone sniffle in the front row. And then, before I even finished my last sentence, my dad stood. Not slowly. Not awkwardly. He stood and began clapping. Loudly. Deliberately. The room followed him. Applause swelled through the space like a wave. But all I could hear was his hands. Clapping for me. Finally. Tears filled my eyes, but I held my smile. He wasn't just proud. He was present. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't have to wish for the moment. I was living it. After the event, people came up to shake my hand, take pictures, ask questions. I answered everything I could, smiling, floating, still trying to absorb the reality of it all. But there was only one person I was really looking for when the crowd began to thin out. I found him by the coffee table, refilling his cup. Same old habit. Same slow, quiet movements. But now, there was a different weight behind them. Something steady. "Sure." "Hey," I said, walking up beside him. He handed me a cup without asking. "You look like you could use one." I smiled. "You stood." He sipped his coffee, then looked at me. "You earned it. I didn't think you'd actually do it." He shrugged, but there was a glint in his eye. "Didn't think I would either." We stood in silence for a moment, sipping our coffee. No rush. No pressure. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it later," he said. "Not now." I raised an eyebrow but tucked it into my bag. He patted my shoulder, then walked toward the exit. Later that night, after everything had been packed up and the building was dark, I sat on my bed and opened the envelope. Inside was a note. His handwriting, blocky and precise. "You were never invisible. I just didn't know how to look." And taped to the bottom of the note, my kindergarten drawing of me on a stage, smiling, stick figure crowd clapping. One of those drawings I thought had been lost years ago. He'd kept it. That night, I cried. Not from sadness. Not even from joy. But from the deep, full feeling of finally being understood. Of a love that wasn't loud, but had always been there, waiting to be seen, like a light behind heavy curtains. Since then, Full Circle has grown. More shelters. More businesses. More lives touched. I now get invited to speak at schools, at local panels, at places I once never felt worthy to enter. And every time I speak, I end with this. Someone out there might not know how to say they're proud of you. Don't mistake that for absence. Some people build love like a foundation, quiet, deep, unseen. And one day, if you look close enough, you'll realize they were clapping for you all along. And to anyone watching this, if this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your own quiet builder, or made you want to become one, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Not just for me, but for everyone out there doing the silent work of showing up. Because in the end, presence is louder than applause.